Hello, everyone. I thought I would do a reaction or follow up to the video I made a couple of days ago about the anniversary of my book, The Ecstasy and the Ignominy, and how it wasn't really selling. Well, I'm really amazed at some of the responses that I received, although I really shouldn't have been, especially from people who just pass through, who don't really know who I am and think that they can give some kind of layered or valid opinion on it. And some of the comments came off as, to be perfectly honest, sociopathic, and I had to delete them because the internet is a very cruel place where quite often, if someone feels like they do not understand something or they feel threatened by it, instead of trying to learn, they will lash out. Um, and I think that's very unfortunate. Genuine empathy is quite rare, and that's made me quite cynical about life in general. And even sometimes there will be people who will try to encourage authors by saying, "Oh, well, you need to do this or you need to do that, and that's how you can improve." And I understand where they're coming from, but at the same time, sometimes that can come off a little cold and still not like you're genuinely empathizing. I'm not saying that's true. It's just that's how it can come off at times. And so yeah, and of course my that video got more views than usual. Um, but I think because I talked about something negative that struck a nerve, quite often if I talk about things that I love, they don't get any views at all. So yeah, that was a disappointing video in many ways. But I thought that I would, and I will say before this though, is that I think one of the reasons why my book is so difficult to sell is because I wrote this book essentially for for classic literature fans, is because this book is heavily inspired by classic literature. But one of the problems is that of course the general public is not really interested in classic literature to any degree. But even when it comes to people who are interested in classic literature, they often will read books or judge books by authority. So quite often, and I've been guilty of this myself at times. I try not to be. Quite often, someone who is interested in classic literature um, will only read books if they have been venerated, and even if there's a book that may have things that they like, poetry, complexity, moral ambiguity. If it doesn't have a reputation, many classic literature readers will not consume it because class. So I think that's one of the reasons why my book is so hard to sell is because it's inspired heavily by classic literature, but you have the general public who just isn't interested in it, and then you have people who might be interested in it if they would give it a chance, but they don't. And I think that's the dilemma, because my book is essentially, again, I can't explain the plot in every video. I do quite often explain it in videos, but I'll just try to explain a little bit of here. You know, it's about an set during the Industrial Revolution in a town full with mountains by the sea. It focuses on the character of Catherine Harris, who is the wife of a wealthy industrialist, and she falls in love with Edward Compton, who is an artist who works for Frederick and Frederick Harris, one of the industrialists. And they again they fall. There's a forbidden love story that takes place over the course of the story, and while this revolution is going on, then you have a character of Desmond Archer who tries to seduce his landlady so he can get her money so he can finance the revolution. You have the characters of Bertrand Shaw, who is a philosopher who is leading the revolution, and so all of these various elements. And but one of the core themes, though, in my book is about how that any kind of ideology, any kind of ideology, um, can be even if it even ideologies that are forces for good can turn destructive without compassion and without empathy. And that's one of the things I think I saw quite a lot in the comment section a couple of days ago. And there's a turning point in my book where towards the end where you have the philosopher Bertrand Shaw who leads this revolution against the capitalists, and he has many legitimate grievances, but it ends up to the point where A lot of people who shouldn't have been executed end up being executed, and it just becomes very violent and it lacks humanity, kind of like the French Revolution. And but eventually he comes to this epiphany where he realizes what he is doing, and that's when he gives this speech, which I won't be able to read all of, but where he essentially questions what he's doing, and why without compassion and empathy, without that, ultimately his revolution cannot work. And he realizes that when he says, what does it mean to be good and to do good? Is it simply providing the maximum amount of pleasure for the greatest number of people? Surely not. When I say good morning to my fellow man, it is not because I view him as a means to an end, but an end in himself. Such a view cannot be justified in a world full of shadow and mist. It can only exist within the transcendent, something that philosophers say is dead, and yet it lives within me, brightening my soul like the sun brightens day, and I am no longer afraid of the light. For how can the sky fear that which makes it glorious? To me, that is one of the best speeches from the book. I actually made my father cry when I read this speech to him, and he rarely cries about anything. And so when I read it in full context, there's not enough time to do it here. Um, but yeah, but one of the central themes of my book is about how people need to have more compassion and more empathy, because that is how we create a better world, regardless of what your ideology or religion is. That's beside the point. And so in many ways, the reaction on that video proved my point about how the world is and about how people need to change. So overall, that is those are my thoughts on the video I posted a few days ago.